I've got a short presentation, but I'll stick to an agenda as well. First, I'll share the agenda so everyone has an idea of where we're headed tonight. We'll start off with an introduction, catch you all up to speed on our timeline as we're moving forward. Then we'll jump right into two main categories, I think, for discussion this evening. Proposed uses in the R7 district, and then parking. We'll try and stick to the questions in the agenda as best as possible. I think staff is really looking for direction from the neighborhood and to see where everyone's heads are at on the few things that we're looking to hammer down. So I will jump right into the presentation then. And here is that. Okay, so just to give you an idea of our timeline, where we're at right now is we took a study session to the Historic Preservation Commission about 2 weeks ago on February 8th. And the goal of this study session was to share our text amendment and ideas for the text amendment with the HPC as it is relevant to historically relevant and significant buildings in the city of Urbana, and especially in the West Urbana neighborhood. We took a lot away from that meeting, I think, and the HPC was largely in support of reuse and preservation of the buildings in the R7 district, specifically the Greek fraternity and sorority houses. So from that meeting, we have drafted zoning ordinance language for the R7 district. The few things that we'll talk about tonight being proposed uses and parking. And that is the neighborhood meeting tonight, number 3. And then we are planning for the Plan Commission meeting on March 10th. So in a few weeks, we will bring a draft text amendment to the Plan Commission. And from there, Committee of the Whole and City Council with kind of rough timeline. So just kind of jumping right into it. A recap for those of you who have been at, I think, most of these meetings so far. Just a location map of all of the R7 properties, give you an idea of what geographic location we're looking at. And to jump to the two things that we are focusing on tonight, I think we'll start with additional uses and regulations for those uses in R7. So the 3 main questions that we are bringing to you tonight are listed on the screen here. And I think we just kind of want to reiterate what we think we've been hearing and ask the first question, which is there neighborhood support for residential uses in existing buildings in the R7 district? And I think that pertains mostly to multifamily residential uses, being apartment uses, but also things like assisted living facilities, independent living facilities, those types of uses that were not included in the original R7 use table of uses. And if there is neighborhood support for those uses in existing buildings now. So I think we can start the conversation there. I'll try not to hog screen time and let everyone see each other. If anyone would like to speak on behalf of that or confirm what I think staff has already been hearing, that there is support for residential uses in these existing buildings in R7. I think that's kind of square one for us at this point. Yeah, Danny.
I support residential uses in these buildings.
Thank you for your support on that, question 1. Mary Pat, thank you for raising your hand as well. Go ahead.
Yes. I mean, I didn't know that was a question, actually. I thought we, in our last 2 neighborhood meetings, that we did support that. But if for the record, I'm with Danny on that. I support residential use. Thank you.
I think to to kind of give direction to where these questions are coming from, I think we're trying to really hammer down what we have been hearing at earlier neighborhood meetings and then get direction for things where direction hasn't been quite as clear. So just starting the conversation with residential uses seemed to be the best kind of square one. So I appreciate both of you speaking up on behalf of that. If everyone is okay, we can move on to, oh, Lisa, go ahead.
Yeah, I support that. I think that that is the general gist of any kind of residential uses. I don't think you'll have any, shall we say, negative feedback about that.
Thank you. And Pierre.
Yes, I'm sorry, my camera is not working, but I hope I can still ask a question. I was wondering what kind of business you were thinking would be of interest there. We maybe not want pawn shops or gun shops or tattoo shops, but are we going to have restaurants? Is that something that's going to be of value to people who live in that area? And I'm comparing here with the corner of Lincoln and University, where we have the Gather development. So that seems to have brought some positive effects. There are a coffee shop, and there's a few other things that are of interest really to the residents nearby. What really are we contemplating if we allow business to open down south?
Sure. Yeah, and that takes us right into the second question for this section in particular. To give you an idea of where we're at as far as uses go, permitted uses go, we've been using the mixed office residential zoning district as a starting point, I think, and a framework for the types of uses that would be allowed in existing buildings only in R7 buildings in the district. So those uses are available in the draft language that was posted online. I think, for lack of a better term, I would call them limited intensive commercial uses. So gun shop, pawn shop, the few that you threw out would not be permitted by right or at all. But a few that are mentioned throughout the MOR district table of uses would be, and I've got it in front of me here, like convenience store uses, clothing stores. So some of the uses that we've seen in the mixed office residential district have been thrift shops, small salon uses, things like small office uses, retail offices, things like that. So that, I think, is our starting point as far as table of uses go. And I think that's a good place to start the conversation. I think we would welcome feedback on its uses and just in general commercial uses in existing buildings.
Thank you.
Danny, go ahead.
In looking at the table of uses, table 5.1, you have P permitted asterisk, and then at the footnote it says with conditional use permit. What it says permitted by right, comma, with conditional use permit. What precisely does that mean?
Yes, so the language or the wording on that is kind of confusing. Any use with a P and asterisk would be permitted by right in an existing building only. So those with C would stand for conditional use permit. Those would be allowed with a conditional use permit in an existing building only. And then special use permit, the same thing. The asterisk is really there to denote that the use would only be allowed in an existing building. It would not be allowed in any new construction after this ordinance were passed. So I think the way that it's listed is written so that the use would be permitted either by right or with a conditional use permit or with a special use permit, depending on how it is noted in the table of uses. But I understand the confusing wording on that.
Is it legal to restrict use to existing buildings and prohibit it for new construction?
That's a great question. I think that is kind of the basis of the text amendment. So at this point in time, I don't think there's anything in the zoning ordinance that's like this. And as far as we've done research, there isn't really a precedent for this in other communities. But because we really want to protect and preserve and reuse the existing Greek houses in the district, allowing these uses in existing buildings only makes more sense, and also kind of prevents demolition or incentive for redevelopment outside of the existing structure.
Thank you.
Yeah, but Peter, that's a great question, and one that we had not even considered yet. So we'll run that by our legal team just to make sure that we're not crazy here. So thank you.
Okay.
I'll let someone else go since Mary Pat has her hand up. I've been getting my share of questions in.
No, I just put my hand up after you
Go ahead.
started speaking,
Go ahead.
Danny. Well, I have a couple of process questions because I think it was our first meeting that we had as a neighborhood, and there were more people present at that meeting, and we had a good discussion about this list. And yet the list, there wasn't consensus on many of these items, and many of these items were kind of struck from the list in terms of not being appropriate for this particular corridor and this edge of a residential area. And so I'm surprised to see the list just appear again with whether it's P's or C's or S's or whatever, to be here without reflecting those earlier comments. And so I have a question about process, why we're not seeing a kind of modified list that actually reflects the comments of previous neighborhood meetings. And also the historic preservation meeting also indicated that a subset of these alternative uses is probably appropriate, but not the whole list. And so that's a question about process. And my related question to that is, what is the thinking that the more district uses is appropriate for the Lincoln-Busey corridor? When there's been there's been a conversation both in the neighborhood and the city, and advocacy by our city council representation about the preference for residential there. What is the thinking the city has to take this more list and apply it to that corridor? It's not coming through very clearly to me, but seeing it again here, tonight, and I'm just not sure what's going on.
Yeah, well, I mean, the thinking overall with this whole project is we want to make sure that these buildings get reused. So really what we're thinking is not that old Greek houses are going to get turned wholesale into one of these commercial uses, but if somebody wanted to, say, put apartments in one of these old buildings and then put a small bakery or a cafe in there, we think that would probably be a pretty good use, and it would be a benefit to the neighborhood. And since the goal is to reuse the buildings, we don't want to preclude somebody's creative reuse of one of these buildings by just saying all you can do is residential. Now, if the neighborhood says no, absolutely, we don't want, we think a small scale bakery or cafe in one of these old buildings would not be appropriate at all, then, I think we'd scale it back and just say, let's do residential only. But from an urban planning perspective, and just from a neighborhood vibrancy perspective, we've heard that people like the walkable nature of the neighborhood. They want something that's sustainable. We think that small scale businesses, fit pretty well into neighborhoods. So, I mean, there's discussions to be had, you know, we could pursue like limiting sizes of some of the uses just to make sure somebody doesn't, you know, put in something, you know, in the whole building or super massive. But that's kind of
Yeah.
where I'm coming from.
So, okay, so that kind of answers like the two questions. Is a little bit of, doesn't answer a question about why we still see this list, because we actually went through this list, and we I think did hear some interest in what you're saying. Small scale integration of small scale, again, the walkability, the livability, the idea that the bakery is always cited as a great thing, a small cafe, but we still see here on this list mortuary. We see meat and fish market. Well, that's an S. We see health club fitness. We see athletic training facilities, pool halls, indoor theaters. We're starting to see things that are of a scale and nature. Actually, there was tobacconists in here, which Pierre said we don't want a smoke shop, which that would be. There's a scale issue of scale of business here, and also that would bring other things like the parking, like it would just shift it from the idea of a local small business to something that's larger, and kind of invite in the thing that you're saying that we're not trying to do. So that's why process about this list to me is unclear. And I'll just reiterate that too, that I do think that we agreed with some of the things you just said, but this list does not reflect those previous meetings and discussions.
Yeah, and thank you for bringing that up. I mean, the reason that we went with the MOR list to begin with is just that it's already an established list, that it took a lot of I think neighborhood and staff time back in the day when it was established to sort of come up with this list that would be appropriate in sort of a walkable established neighborhood. So, you know, that's where we came from as a starting point. I think when we go to Plan Commission, we can bring to them sort of a list, and we can flag things that folks have said might not be appropriate. And then I think we can have those conversations there. And of course, Plan Commission is where the official public hearing is. So that's where we need people to come out and voice their opinion at that hearing, so that we get that on the official record as well. But we're not wedded to this list. We're fine with striking things that don't seem appropriate, and frankly probably would never, somebody would probably never put in a huge athletic training facility somewhere in the district. So, whether it's on the list or whether we strike it, it probably doesn't matter, but I'm fine with striking it.
I will say, just to add to that, we had considered, Kevin and I have been through this list a few times and flagged things, similar things that you've talked about that we've also heard in neighborhood meetings. But I really do reiterate what Kevin's saying, where it's a good starting point for us. And if you're able to, if we're able to gather feedback from you all about things that really do cause concern and heartburn, I don't think it's a problem for us to recognize that and take it off the list. I think that's pretty reasonable. Leslie, did you have your hand raised?
I do. I want to highlight that the mobile app does not allow you to raise your hand. Like, I've looked all over it, and as an IT person, I would have found it by now. But so you may want to be conscious of that going forward. I'm kind of following Mary Pat. Mary Pat, thank you for articulating some of my concerns very much of feeling not heard. And it's nice to know that you're willing to consider feedback. And we've heard that before, but then this was offered. So to me, what this proposal of the MOR district fits, it feels very much like the west side, the east side of Lincoln in the UC corridor, where many of these R7s are, or within my neighborhood overall, if the R7s are outside of that area, that the intent is to enable the feel and the options that are on the west side of Lincoln to be applied to the east side of Lincoln, which is really the opposite of having a residential neighborhood. And so personally, I am opposed to this suggestion. I know that on Green Street there is an MOR district, and I understand why, but that's a little different than what the Lincoln-Busey corridor was originally designed for. And I feel very concerned and not supportive whatsoever of what you're proposing in terms of an MOR district for that area. And you know, I'm trying to be understanding and to be flexible because I do want the properties to be able to be reused, but I'm very concerned with the impact of what that will do. And especially when you have that loophole potential, as was mentioned, for new construction. You know, the intent is not to add, to say, okay, it's all right to have that level of mixed use that's on the other side, that's on the university area. That's very different than the intended atmosphere of the neighborhood. And I personally, I think I just want to say that I'm opposed to that. And I do not feel, based upon what was proposed, that very much of the feedback that we gave at the previous meeting was actually taken into account. So I'm very concerned about that. Clearly, they're in the city planning department, you're trying to be creative, and I think that's great. But at the same time, I feel like you have an agenda and a plan, and I don't necessarily feel that my input as a neighbor who is 1 to 2 blocks from that location in those areas and those buildings, I'm on West Oregon Street, that my feedback is necessarily being considered as well as I think it should be. And it has me very concerned that you're going to wait and not adjust what you're proposing, even if you go forward with this. Those options in the MOR options, you're not removing them based upon feedback in this meeting until Planning Commission. And Planning Commission has not been a very friendly to the neighborhood, and they really don't care what we say. So I have very big concerns around this and feel like we're just being sideswiped again and ignored. So that's what my 2 cents about that, and I'll be done.
Danny, go ahead.
The FAR in R7, in R7 is 0.5. There had previously been a discussion, I think Eric had proposed that everything be crammed down to R2, which I don't think is viable, but that would be 0.4. But in MOR, it's 0.7. And so you're saying that the alternative uses, non-residential uses, would only apply to buildings that were built before the implementation of this, and any building after that would have to be residential. But because it's in the MOR, it could be 0.7, right?
We are not proposing that any of the properties at this time be rezoned to MOR. What we're proposing, and this is, I want to address one of Leslie's comments as well. This was draft language. None of this is concretely formed at this point. I think that's safe to say. But to answer your question, Danny, we wouldn't rezone any of these properties to MOR at this time. The uses that would be listed for the R7 district would be allowed in existing buildings, and any new construction in the R7 district would be held to the development regulations for R7 as they exist now. So to that point,
I misunderstood. I understood that you were going to rezone it to MOR. So I had earlier proposed that rather than doing a one size sort of fits all, that you add to the R7 language that conditional use proposals and so on would be encouraged, and in collaboration with the neighborhood, a variety of things could be considered. That would be less confusing, because I really, and I think from what Leslie said, she understood too that you were proposing that these would be MOR, and so that helps clarify it. So I think for clarity, all we really need to do is to tell the owners and do an amendment to R7 saying that the Plan Commission, the council, and the community will consider proposals that are not disruptive to the community and come with some ideas. And before you spend $10,000 on engineering reports, talk to the neighborhood about whether you've got a good idea that people would like to see. I think that would be uncontroversial. It would guarantee, when we were seeing, and you were talking about things that could be done by right, conditional use and so on, I really understood that you were suggesting a conversion to MOR, but if you're not, then I think this language, the MOR thing. So what is the actual text language that's going to be presented to the Plan Commission? Do you
So I
have
think-
that?
Yeah, so the language that was posted prior to this meeting with the article titles, so the change to the number or to the description of the R7 district, the additional use regulations for the R7 district, parking, which will be discussed shortly, and then sign regulations. That was draft language for the R7 district. But I think the simplest way to put it is the major change would be that the uses that are permitted in the mixed office residential zoning district would be added to the R7 district for existing buildings only. That is really the basis of the text amendment.
Okay, I misunderstood that. So all of the minimum lot size, width, height, FAR, OSR, that would continue as R7. Okay.
Correct.
It would, but Danny, I want to jump in. I know we've kicked around the idea of taking the rooming houses and boarding houses and separating those out because they are, I think we've heard from the neighborhood and just in all of our conversations that really the Greek houses and the rooming houses are kind of different animals. So if there were a way to treat them differently and allow them to be reused and still maintain the character of the neighborhood, that would be useful. So I know we had thrown out there at one point that for the rooming houses, it might be useful to rezone those to MOR. And the reason that we threw that out is because the MOR, it does have a higher floor area ratio, as you pointed out, but it also has a key thing, which is that it caps the FAR to a certain size to limit basically to make it not feasible for developers to take like 2 or 3 parcels, put them together and put up one big building. The MOR already has that built into it. So if we wanted to do something that was, we already have that there. So I think we had thrown out that idea as a possibility.
Pierre?
Yeah, what I have to say in a way echoes what Danny said earlier. So there's a lot of diversity in all these properties, and there's some kinds of businesses that we like to encourage, some not. So currently there's some flexibility already because any owner of one of these Greek houses or rooming houses could propose a PUD if they have some interesting commercial redevelopment in mind. Or like Danny said, some language could be added to strengthen the fact that it would be nice maybe to have conditional use that is beneficial and so on. So why do we need to modify the code to give a blanket agreement to allow any of these properties to be redeveloped in a way that may not actually be suitable? So the current way, if we have PUDs as an option and so on, seems to present enough flexibility. So I would like to hear what's the argument against that.
Yeah, I think, well, the main argument against that is that most of these properties, possibly all of them, could not be PUDs because the PUD requires you have at least half an acre of land. So like the property that you have, it just happened to be slightly over half an acre. So, you know, you were able to apply for your PUD and do, frankly, a fantastic project with it. And that seeing your project come to life, kind of, it's something that we can look at and say, we could do more of that with these old Greek houses, but right now we can't because they can't do PUDs unless it's over half an acre.
Okay, thank you. But I didn't even know, by the way, they'll say half an acre lower limit. Can that limit be reduced? If we think a PUD at a smaller scale is good for neighborhoods, why not change that half an acre lower limit to some smaller number?
I mean, I suppose that's a possibility. I guess I'll throw out the question, does the neighborhood want to see more PUDs come in? I see Mary Pat shaking her head no. So, I mean, the PUD process I don't think it's everybody's favorite. I think, what we're trying to do is come up with something that can be reasonable and that's going to fit well into the neighborhood. But it's going to remove barriers because, if somebody has a really good project, we shouldn't be, we shouldn't allow the reuse of a building just because our processes get in the way if it's an otherwise good project. So that's where we're trying to go with this.
I want.
Yeah,
I see
Danny,
Pierre
go
has it. Okay.
Oh.
My concern about incorporating the list is that there are a number of those things that can be done by right. And if they're not altering the building in a way that would require going, to the plan commission or so on, the neighborhood actually wouldn't have a voice in it. And, when I travel, sometimes I end up in an apartment right next door, right above a restaurant that's got a lovely outdoor patio, which I love, but I do not want to live next door. I know from traveling that, or even when neighbors are having a nice time, I'm not talking about a loud beer bash, but when people are eating outside in the summertime, but no one would have any input if you simply incorporate certain of these things that can be done by right, which is why I prefer just drawing attention to people that the special use permit, and then the neighborhood always gets their input, and then the plan commission and city council can decide whether it's legitimate or not. But I think when you're doing this sort of stuff in a residential neighborhood, we're going to really want to be able to be heard on anything that any sort of business that alters that significantly. And if it's just an insurance salesman or an accountant, everyone's going to say fine.
Yeah.
I will mention,
no, go ahead, Ken.
Just to address your example, Danny, restaurants actually do require a special use permit in the mixed office residential district. And I think for the most part, the uses that, may cause some sort of disturbance in some capacity are kind of levied by that special use permit or conditional use permit requirement. So to your point, professional business office or a retail office, something like that, is permitted by right in MOR, and in this case, in an existing building only. But something like a restaurant, which may, gather more foot traffic or have a higher noise level, would require that special use permit.
Yeah, and with as Danny, I'm sure you're aware, with things like special use permits or excuse me, conditional use permits, you can add stipulations like hours of operation, just so that you're not going to have a restaurant that is going till 1 a.m. or something, and really disrupting you. But I just want to reiterate, we're not wedded to, or maybe I haven't stated it so clearly, we're not wedded to this list. We just wanted to use this list as a starting point. So if there's you know, we'll bring, when we go to Plan Commission, we'll bring a list based on the feedback we're hearing here. We can bring them a draft list and, you know, strike through some stuff that seems not appropriate. We can, you know, we can throw conditional uses on other things if we, you know, if those seem more appropriate for conditional uses. It's not, you know, the MOR district isn't perfect, so this list is not perfect. So we're not, you know, again, we're not wedded to it. And then I think when we have that draft list together, then that would be a time when we'd really want to hear people's comments about, you know, about specific uses and things, so that we can take that to Plan Commission and have a better conversation. Yeah, Mary Pat.
I just wanted to share again back to the question about process, that the community hasn't had a very good process, hasn't felt that very heard by the Plan Commission. And there are other members of the neighborhood who aren't present here tonight who have been more articulate about that. To both of you in a previous meeting, the neighborhood, in my understanding, would not be in favor of you going to Plan Commission with an open list for discussion with them about what stays on and what gets crossed off. And instead to create a list that reflects the series of neighborhood meetings and the Historic Preservation Committee meeting, and go to the Plan Commission with that's a consensus list of things that seem appropriate in this context and that reflect the intentions that you said are what you have for this area, which we support the reuse of those buildings and the creative reuse in some ways of those buildings, particularly the large structures. That I think would be a much better way of building some trust with the community, and also probably a better outcome at the Plan Commission, rather than having the neighborhood showing up at that either really nervous, a little bit irate, potentially feeling on edge. Because as you've said, this is just was a convenient list to pull, but it's not the list that you really intend. So it would be better to actually develop a more refined list that reflects your interests and the feedback that you're getting. So that would be my suggestion at this point, based on previous experiences with the Plan Commission and this process, the way that it's been going. I mean, that's on March 10th, you said. So that's less than 3 weeks away. And so seeing this language at this late date, which feels like it's just right around the corner, really, that meeting, if we don't see a revision of that, that's going to raise some concern in the neighborhood, I think.
Yeah, I absolutely understand that. And I do realize that the March 10th meeting is coming up quickly. I would welcome, and I hear all of your feedback tonight, especially about particular uses. I would also welcome that in an email if there are things that you have serious concern about, or even minimal concern about. Shoot me an email, because it's a lot easier for us to kind of collect that feedback and get it onto paper when it's all in one spot. But I'm taking notes here. Obviously, this meeting's recorded, and I think Kevin and I would both be more than amenable to editing this list to reflect the neighborhood concern.
Yeah, I just put a note in the chat there because I think that's really important, Kat. Thank you so much. I think the neighborhood should feel like they can write to you and share ideas, some concerns, but also ideas. You might hear some creative feedback and reception to the ideas you're putting out there. You might hear a lot of pushback, but you might hear some interest in that to make it a little more urban, maybe. I don't know. And the idea of small scale businesses is something people have said used to exist in the neighborhood. So that's great. Thanks for the email. That's great. The address, I mean. Thanks.
Yeah, I will say I've been trying to do, research, and there's not a real good categorization or library of uses that have existed throughout Urbana over the last 100 or so years. But it's really interesting to hear people's firsthand takes on places that used to be in their neighborhood. And some of them do still exist nowadays, and that's a good place for us to point to and say, oh, this is working well at that location. something similar in this location might be a good fit. So.
I want to apologize as I'm going back through your document title changes R7. The MOR language is not here. I don't know where that got in my head. It was someplace else. So I'll read this introduction and go on more carefully. And if I have any suggestions about language there that's confusing, bring them up. But I agree with what Mary Pat said. That list has got way too many things, and people will not understand that it's a discussion list. I would pare that back substantially. There's a whole host of things that raise red flags. And so if you focus on, a coffee shop, a small scale bakery, home businesses, massage therapy, definitely. Our neighborhood loves massage therapy. Yoga studio, so this reflects a sort of list of uses from somebody 30 or 40 years ago. And so I think you're on the right track, and you are essentially, and especially if you really have all of them conditional use so that people get input, then I think the neighborhood will feel like in an ongoing fashion, they will have input into what happens. And it's not I got to imagine every vile thing that could happen and then oppose that imaginary thing. And if they know that no one can do anything without coming back with a plan and everyone gets to be heard, that would address a lot of our concerns.
Kevin, any final thoughts before we move on to quick parking discussion?
No, nothing now. Yeah, we should probably move along to the easy question, parking.
Right. I'll pop the questions up here. And this is something Kevin and I have talked about for quite a while, it feels like, and again earlier today. But something I'll mention is that conservatively, an estimate is that roughly half of the buildings in the R7 district could not be reused for really any commercial use and many residential uses because of parking requirements. And we're trying to work through this issue in multiple different ways and think about it in different ways. And these ideas have been kind of on the forefront, I think, of the conversation. Addressing parking regulations and minimum parking requirements in kind of a few facets. So the first being limiting the number of parking permits available to individual properties. That could be one way to address the parking or lack of parking available on site while still providing parking off-site, either on street or through a lease agreement with a property nearby, which kind of leads us into the next bullet point, which would be requiring a certain amount of parking to be provided off-site. So that being either on street with a parking permit or through a lease agreement with a neighboring property. Neighboring properties, especially across Lincoln Avenue, being the university, often end up with excess parking beyond what would be required of their use. So for a use that's not able to meet the parking requirement on their lot, being able to lease parking from a nearby property that has more than the required amount of parking, that can help to address that. The last bullet point here, and I think one that is fairly difficult, would be requiring parking for new uses at the rate provided in the zoning ordinance. So as I said, roughly 50% of the properties in the R7 district could not be reused because of parking requirements. So if we applied those parking requirements to a new use in an existing building, it would basically render that use impossible. So that's kind of where we're at through the staff thinking side of things, I think. And I did not phrase those as questions, but I think they are kind of questions. So what was my question, I guess? Would the neighborhood be amenable, I think, to allowing parking to be provided off-site, either through parking lease agreements or with parking permits through the city that are issued through the city, or just general thoughts on those few bullet points there?
Actually, before people weigh in, I want to I just want to state, I've said this in another meeting, but I think it would be kind of tragic if we had a nice old Greek house and somebody wanted to reuse it, and the only reason that they couldn't reuse it was because it didn't meet our parking requirements. I think we should be able to come up with some clever ways to address the real concern of folks about limited on-street parking. But I think, as Kat pointed out, we have a couple of ways that we can do that. So, one of them is through leasing spaces off-site, because there are places that have excess parking nearby. But another is, the city controls the supply of on-street parking permits. So just limiting the supply in some way for properties. So I guess those are the questions that we have. Do you think it's reasonable to look into ways to limit on-street parking permits, and would requiring some off-site parking be an acceptable thing to do as well?
Leslie, did you raise your hand before?
She can go ahead. I'll wait.
I just wanted clarification around the permitting option. So the idea being, when you talked about the option of allowing, say someone has a massage therapy, just as an example, in an R7 business, and they want to get additional spaces, and they want to do that by getting permits. Right now, permits, I believe, are when we get a permit in the neighborhood for a property, that it's associated with a vehicle, right? So how would that permit for this business, when they're trying to get a permit that could be used for a customer? I guess I'm trying to understand, if you could clarify what you're thinking around that more. I was just trying to understand the logistics of that a little bit. And I'm also curious if there are current limits on the number. We have not had to purchase a permit to park on the street. We have enough parking for it with our property, so it's not something I've dealt with. So I'm curious, are there any current limits for properties currently in the neighborhood or not? I'm just curious about more details on that.
Yeah, I'll speak to your first question and then defer to Kevin for question number 2. But logistically speaking, I think that's something that would absolutely need to be hammered down. It's something I was talking to our parking department about earlier today, but being able to pull a limited number of parking permits for customers that would maybe not be vehicle specific, but would be business specific. Something like that, I think, comes to mind more than having vehicle specific parking passes. Something that denotes that maybe this person is a customer or a visitor of a business in the R7, and that tag looks different than a residential tag. Maybe the timing of those permits is different. We limit them during daytime hours and not nighttime hours, as residents are coming home from work or school. and parking on the street to go to their homes and park overnight. You know, patrons to businesses would likely be there during the day, depending on the type of business. There are lots of details to be figured out, but I think that that is one reasonable solution, or at least something to talk about internally and you know, ongoing with the neighborhood as well, about getting that permit question figured out. But at this point in time, the permits don't work in a way that would allow customers of a business to park in a residential spot. They're tied to the vehicle and to someone that lives in West Urbana with proof of a West Urbana address.
Yeah, and the reason that that's the case, and Leslie, that's a great question. I mean, the reason that's the case is because we haven't had to deal with that. You know, we haven't had to deal with business uses and figuring out how to have on-street parking for them. And then to your other question, no, there aren't limits on how many parking permits you can have. So when we looked back in 2018, we were looking at multifamily properties nearby campus. We were trying to do a parking inventory to see what the supply and demand was on those. But as part of that, I looked into how many permits, on-street parking permits, were pulled for each property in West Urbana, and some of the Greek houses have, you know, had 20 or 30 or 40 permits pulled because we don't cap that. Essentially, you know, it's a pretty basic system. You come in, you show proof of your address, and you pay your money, and you get a parking permit. So I think there's great opportunity to have a more nuanced approach that would work out better here. Let's go. I'm not sure if Ann or Ian had their hand up first, so I'm going to go with. I'll go with Ian, since, you know, people go alphabetically all the time, and I'm going reverse alphabetically. So Ian.
Cheers. Just a quick question. I'm somewhat new to Urbana in the last few years. Is it possible for a business to, like, essentially buy out a space, lease a space from the city, so an off or an on-street parking space? So in lieu of, like, trying to figure out some sort of permit system, like a business that was on a corner could, like, if there was parking for 3 spaces along one street, is that possible for a business to essentially lease those spaces from the city?
Right now, no, because like I said, we haven't had to deal with that before. But I mean, that could be an option. So, you know, maybe they lease spaces for, you know, the middle of the day or something, and then those spaces are available for overnight parking for, you know, whoever else holds permits.
And go ahead.
Oh, thank you. Thanks, Kat. I'm thinking back about one of the reasons WUNA was organized or reorganized or re-energized recently was because of parking. And I think we've addressed those issues that we thought were important, where people could never park outside their homes on the street during the day because it was basically a parking lot for the university. And I think we've addressed that. Seems like we've solved it. There's still these little glitches to work out. But I think that regarding parking, one of the things that would be helpful would be to revisit those principles that guided us when we thought about what we wanted to change. And I guess, you know, it would take some thought to come up with those, but I think that that would reassure people about parking, and that, you know, there would probably be spaces outside your home to park. You could buy a permit, a short-term permit, a permit for a contractor, etc. And all those things were important to people because they weren't working well. And Lisa, you'll remember, you know, Hiram Paley, who was mayor of Urbana after he retired, said, I want to have 6 people come over to play bridge and they have to park 8 blocks away. That can't be right. And so, you know, I thought of this as the, you know, the Hiram Paley solution, that we really need to think about how are people living here, and are we using these streets and parking places appropriately? So I think that just kind of thinking back, not getting into the weeds about what the parking would be, but just thinking about some of these principles that would guide that decision-making and rule-making, I think would be enough at this point. Kind of the common sense perspective.
Thanks, Ann. Danny, go ahead.
I agree with what's been said so far. To me, it's also a tragedy if, in order to provide parking, people pave the whole backyard of a house in order to get it. So that's not a win either. And so I applaud looking into some of these suggestions that are made about maybe developing a new type of a pass where for certain hours a business can have a visitor pass. The other thing is it has to do with the scale of the business. So back to that original list, restaurant was listed. And, you know, the Greek House, where it is on Ohio, has large space. One could easily imagine a restaurant there that could seat 30 or 40 or 60 people and so on. And that would just not be appropriate there. The parking would just congest the neighborhood. So the difference between having a small place that seats 10 or 15 people for light meals and something that's a magnet, I think would make the difference. So we want to think about the businesses that are allowed in terms of what sort of car traffic would they need to attract in order to be viable. And if they're going to have a lot of people come into the neighborhood in order to, for their business model, we would say that's not going to work very well here because we don't want parking lots. And even if I were a neighbor, backyard, side yard to a business that had a parking lot there and people coming and going all day long, it's hard to enjoy your Saturday afternoon beer and a nap in a hammock if you're adjacent to a lot of traffic like that. So scale of the businesses really needs to be a key part of getting this acceptable.
I absolutely agree. Lisa, go ahead.
I agree with everything that's been said. And of course, I agree with Kevin that we don't want to discourage a very wonderful redevelopment just on parking. But I also agree with Ann and Danny that the devil's in the details. So to be able to have the most flexibility, I think to meet the greatest need of the neighborhood and the business would be what I would be in favor of. And I think that last time when we met, we did have some owners of some of the boarding houses. And again, I think that, am I understanding correctly? I heard last time that the Greek houses have very different uses and needs or future uses and needs versus the boarding houses. And I guess I don't quite understand how I can see where this will help the redevelopment and the reuse of the Greek houses, but I don't quite understand how this is going to help the reuse or redevelopment of the boarding houses, the rooming houses. And if you could kind of explain the vision for that, because I think that's what I heard those property owners were concerned about, and also had suggested using the PUD process, the PUD, lowering the land amount, the half-acre requirement, and because they thought then the neighborhood would be able to have input and such. But there's a lot of neighborhood opposition to that. Not so much for me, because I do think, you know, we could maybe develop a process for a smaller land requirement. But can you explain that, Kat and Kevin, how these changes would impact those rooming houses? Because to me, that's the kind of the real difficult going forward.
Yeah, and that's a great question, Lisa. Well, so our main goal with this is to get some rules in place that will help us preserve and reuse the Greek houses. since those rooming and boarding houses are in the R7 district, they're kind of tough to deal with. But our thinking right now is let's come up with rules that we think will function for the Greek houses. And if we needed to do something else, like rezone the rooming and boarding houses in the future to make them, to do something that's more suited to them, or then that's a possibility. What we're proposing right now, what it would do for the rooming and boarding houses is it would open up whatever uses we're proposing to those houses. So I think the key thing is that it would open up apartment uses. So if somebody has an old rooming house and they're not able to rent it, but they would be willing to convert it into apartments, and those apartments would be rentable, then this would give them that option. I don't see too many old rooming houses having a business or commercial use, so this might not really affect them at all. But if they did, it would by default, those are smaller buildings, so it'd have to be a small use, so it probably wouldn't be as big of an impact to the neighborhood. But I think right now we're trying to bite off what we can chew and really focus on the big issue, which is coming up with some rules to help us preserve those these highest level, most important Greek houses.
Well, that wraps up, I think, our questions on parking and uses. I just want to reiterate that I welcome any email feedback that you all have. You can give me a call too. It really does help to have it in writing, and I am happy to include that in any future Plan Commission packets and things like that. Does Mary Alice, I saw you just put a question in the chat. Wanted to make sure I caught that before we head out. But if anybody else has any closing thoughts before we leave, thank you all for joining us tonight.
Yeah, Kat, I'll jump in to help wrap up because of something that Mary Pat said earlier. Just procedurally, I know we've scheduled and we advertised for Plan Commission on March 10th, but we can go ahead and continue that hearing to a later date at Plan Commission. But if anybody's interested on March 10th, we will. Sorry, my kid's in the background there. We will be bringing a very short text amendment to the Plan Commission on March 10th to require applicants for planned unit developments to hold a neighborhood meeting in advance of the Plan Commission hearing, because that's something we'd heard folks wanted. So we're going to bring that there. So if anybody's interested in attending that, come on out virtually, of course. And then me and Kat will get together. We'll talk about next steps, get some stuff hammered out. We might just send out this list of uses and ask people to mark them up and send them back to us. That might be the easiest, one of the easiest things to do, and we'll just collate that and and make some sense of it before we go to Plan Commission.
They are posted on the R7 project page now as well. So if you want to get your hands on them immediately and mark it up and send me an email, that is great with me.
Yeah, but I'm thinking maybe we'll want to do one more of these before we go to Plan Commission then, where we can talk about that list, and maybe we'll have time to we being me and Kat will have time to to think more about parking options and get some more ideas fleshed out there too. So I see Danny's got his hand up, and so does Pierre. So Danny, you want to jump in first? I think you're muted, Danny.
I think it's important to have this process span 2 plan commissions. The first be a discussion, and that did not be encouraged to go to a vote, because public participation goes before their discussion, and sometimes there might be things that some of us might like to respond to, but we really can't after the public participation is over. And so if there's things to be clarified, we would have a chance before the final vote. But I encourage 2 meetings. Thank you.
Okay.
I think it'll probably go 2 meetings anyway. Kevin might think otherwise, but typically I think we'll get discussion and feedback from them and be directed to make some changes. But I completely understand the public input piece. Pierre? Go ahead.
Yeah, it's actually a very general question. Do you think these virtual meetings work better or same or worse than the old-fashioned in-person meetings we had before COVID? I see pros and cons, but I just wanted to know what's your senses.
I think there are pros and cons to both. I think we actually get higher attendance in virtual meetings. At least as of lately, it's felt like that. But it doesn't facilitate as smooth a conversation, in my opinion.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for taking time out of your schedules to meet with us and share your thoughts. I look forward to our next meeting, and we'll get working on our end. So thanks everybody.